just like the tendency here to downplay or to discount the threat from Iran and the threat from the Muslim Brotherhood, et cetera, there's also the equal tendency here to downplay the threat on the southern border. And it's not just about, it tends to get subsumed in conversations about immigration and things like that, but there's also a great threat, not only from the cartels, but from Hezbollah and other terrorist operatives that like to take advantage of the porousness of the border and use it as a staging area to train and then send operatives across to the United States. I want to touch on my subject is about Mexico and how the election on Sunday might affect the security situation not only on the border but the relationship between the United States and Mexico. And as it looks now, I was talking to Alexandra, it has roots in Mexico, and from all the polls aren't necessarily perfectly, they're not equivalent, I would say, to Doug Schoen or some of our groups we have here that tend to have a track record. But looks like the PRI, or the party that was in power for 70 years in Mexico, is going to come back into power. I'll get into a little bit about that. But those of you that know Mario Vargas Llosa, the Peruvian novelist that won the Nobel Prize recently, he also ran for president in 1990 in Peru and was defeated by Alberto Fujimori. And right after the election was over, he went to a debate or like a pseudo talk with Octavio Paz, another Mexican Nobel Prize winner in Mexico, and they had this like a 5-day long debate. It would run on television every night, and one of the things that he's remembered for saying there is kind of insulting Mexicans while he was there, insulting the entire country. He said, the PRI, or the PRI, is what I call the perfect dictatorship. There's not been a coup. This party's been in power for 70 years or 60 years at that time, but it's the perfect dictatorship because it's camouflaged. They don't have any strong men. It's spread out throughout the country, and they've perfectly learned how to spread graft and to spread largesse to the right places to keep it in power. And that was knocked out finally in 2000 by the PAN, which was led by Vicente Fox at that time. And then Felipe Calderon, who's going to constitutionally be limited on Sunday to end his one term, is from that party. And it's had a 12-year run now, and it's probably going to get replaced again by the PRI if things go as it looks now. And let me give you a little bit of info on the PRI candidate. The PRI candidate is Enrique Peña Nieto, who is the very telegenic, has a soap opera wife who everyone knows, and the middle-aged women come out to kiss him on the cheek when he goes to campaign throughout the country. So he's built although he's been at a loss to name books that he's read that influenced his political thinking when he's been asked things like that. He's still managed to build a coalition and to be at almost 10 points ahead. And I think in the latest polls that they cut off polling on Wednesday, and that's the latest one I've seen. He's also backed by Carlos Slim. If you guys are familiar with him, he makes the Forbes list every year, and it drives me crazy every time I hear it because he's one of those monopolists that got rich, not like Bill Gates or not like Warren Buffett, but because he got of government contracts. And but he's backed by Carlos Slim, and there's been student protests because the president of Televisa and what's the one other TV station there? One of the two main ones. No, this is Mexican stations, but Teleazteca. They've been an incredibly biased backing of Peña Nieto. So they're speculating that the owner has said, hey, give us some money and we'll give you great coverage. So they've done a great job for him, but it's caused a real backlash there. And another thing Alexandra and I were talking about is the fact that in 2006, the PRD candidate who's back this year was Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, or better known as AMLO, lost by less than a percentage point to Calderon. And to me, Alexander may disagree with me on this, but AMLO to me was the Chavez-backed candidate at the time, and I've got evidence in my book about supposed campaign contributions to AMLO from Chavez, and Chavez was counting on him to be the president in 2006. So for the last 6 years where we've seen a good hard-nosed effort against the cartels, there's no telling what we would have faced if there would have been a Chavez-backed candidate. And as we've seen, what's the great term that besides the perfect dictatorship is democradura, which is a combination of democracy and dictatorship in Spanish, which means that there aren't any more coups in Latin America. They are stealth takeovers. You get elected, one man, one vote, one time, and then you eliminate the institutions within the country, and that's what has happened in Ecuador, Bolivia, Venezuela, even Argentina these days. But that's kind of what I speculated about AMLO. Alexandra may have a more benign view of him than I do, but the other important thing on Sunday to look out for is who comes in second, and it looks like AMLO now is ahead in the polls over Josefina, who is the PAN candidate, who was not backed by, may have been dropped some. She's been a really bad candidate, made lots of verbal gaffes, but she also was not backed by Calderon. And a lot of people kind of blame him for not giving his full backing, because he still has maintained well over 50% popularity despite all the killings and despite all the violence in Mexico. I want to cover a little bit about some of the things that may get exacerbated by this on the border. We don't just. I pulled a lot of this from my book that's coming out in August, and it's not only Hezbollah, but there's Farc, Mexican cartel connections. A 2008 U.S. Embassy cable stated that Farc members have been tied loosely to several Mexican drug trafficking organizations in the past for drugs and gun deals. According to the DEA, one was arrested in Mexico for acting as an intermediary between the Farc and the Mexican cartels. And he was a doctor from the Farc, actually, and came to Mexico to buy medical supplies to take back to the Farc. So there's been a long-term collaboration between these two groups. Hezbollah is what worries me a little bit more, and this gets into a little bit about what Claire talked about. The purpose of Hezbollah, let me restate, this is always important to me, is to export the revolution, export the Iranian revolution. And this is the nexus of all these groups, and the Middle Eastern terrorist groups and the Latin American ones these days, is everything now falls under revolution. If you claim to be part of the revolution worldwide, you fall under, it doesn't matter if you're a Catholic, which 90% or 70, at least 70% of Latin Americans are, or if you're Islamic from the Middle East. As long as you claim this to be part of the revolution, this is the basis of the Chavez-Ahmadinejad collaboration these days. But this is where these two groups come together now, and there's no, I call this the burqa bikini paradox. It does not exist, but you always hear this, the straight-laced Iranians or anybody Islamic would never deal with these beauty queen production lines in Venezuela. They do all the time. They don't care about, the culture does not matter. It's what the end game is that matters more. Hezbollah, in 2008, a Mexican of Lebanese descent. Let me point out that a lot of what Hezbollah does these days, besides fundraising in Latin America, they go to exploit the diaspora of Lebanese and Syrian primarily, but Islamic enclaves in Latin America, and this is what a lot of this comes from. A Mexican of Lebanese descent was sentenced to 60 years in prison on charges of organized crime and immigrant smuggling. He'd been arrested 6 years earlier for smuggling immigrants into the United States, some of whom were connected to Hezbollah. A year before that, in 2001, Mahmoud Yosef Kourani illegally crossed the Mexican border and traveled to Dearborn, Michigan, where he was later charged and convicted for material support and resources to Hezbollah. In July 2008, El Universal reported that a DEA document suggested that since 2005, 2 Mexican drug cartels had been sending operatives to train in Iran with the IRGC. The training included instruction in sniper tactics and the use of rocket launchers. In February of 2011, Adam Housley of Fox News reported that the drug tunnels that they were finding, that they were sending people across the southern border here, were starting to look exactly like the ones where they smuggled into on the border with Israel and Egypt and into the Gaza Strip. In a speech in Mexico in 2007, the former head of the CIA's Counterterrorism Center warned that the United States was concerned that Hezbollah or Hamas would try to set up operations in Mexico in order to infiltrate America's southern border and carry out terrorist attacks. And in July 2010, a Hezbollah cell was busted by Mexican police in Tijuana, where Mexicans of Lebanese origin had been recruited to set up a cell to train for attacks against Israel and the West. The head of the operation, Jamil Nasser, had been under Mexican police surveillance as he traveled frequently back and forth to Lebanon and also spent 2 months in Venezuela in 2008. Note the collaboration is there. And like Claire said, this tendency here to downplay or to discount the threat from stealth jihad, civilization jihad, which this gets covered a lot here at CSP, probably the leader in this. There's been if you go and try to Google this or try to do some research on it, you will be amazed at the amount of counter information you find, not from Hezbollah operatives, but from red-blooded American writers at major magazines. It's incredible to me that the amount of resistance that exists about this about the threat. So I brought a couple of pictures. This one's a little hard to show, but this was found across the border in 2009 in Jemhog County, Texas. If you can read it, it's In Memory of Our Martyrs. This is a book that lionizes the martyrs, the Iranian martyrs from the Iran-Iraq War, and also suicide bombers that have killed themselves subsequently. It's the same thing as the posters that you see of suicide bombers that they put up in their hometowns to venerate them after they kill innocents. This one is my favorite here. This is these are two patches that were taken off the jacket that was found there. This one right here it's almost like a paratrooper patch that you have found here, but with Arabic writing that says "Martyr is the way to salvation." This one right here is self-explanatory. It may not be sure. Self-explanatory because it is a plane flying into the Twin Towers.
Thank you.
I wanted to put a little bit about what the sheriff that found these stated that when he reported the find to the Subcommittee on Investigations, he said that both Homeland Security as well as the FBI summarily dismissed the find as unimportant. But prior to the sheriff's report, Homeland Security had issued officer alerts to their agents warning that they had received intelligence about cartels on the border planning to kill a number of U.S. border agents. And although no attack took place at that time, Agent Jaime Zapata was shot to death by cartel members in the Mexican border town of San Luis Potosí in February of 2011. And authorities say that Zapata and his partner, who was shot in the leg, had identified themselves as U.S. agents before they were shot. Edgardo Buscaglia, a government researcher at ITAM University in Mexico, recently reported that Mexican drug cartels have begun collaborating with Afghan narco-traffickers to help them with their supply to the European Union and the United States also. The newspaper El Universal reported that the Sinaloa cartel, along with others, had set up ghost companies with the help of Turkish and Indian smugglers in Afghanistan to aid them with heroin trafficking. According to Buscaglia, this collaboration had allowed the Mexican cartels that had always served only as mules when Colombia ruled the cocaine trade to now become international operations. Quote, "It is in the interest of these Mexican groups that they open smuggling routes for distribution of heroin in the U.S. market. Furthermore, they are not only focusing on the movement of Afghan heroin through Mexico, they are also taking positions of power as major players in the international world of heroin trade. And to avoid having their money traced as it enters the banking system, they also have begun to do arms for heroin trade. So they don't have to, they don't get any, they don't get on OFAC's list, or they don't get traced through the banks. They can just make trades for not just small arms, but military equipment, anti-aircraft even they found in these transactions. I want to tie this up with being slightly more optimistic than I'm giving you here, but if the PRI wins Sunday, there could be a Nixon to China type moment that I would hope. There's been a lot of talk between the PAN and the PRI. The PRI that was the 70-year-old perfect dictatorship always blocked, over the last 12 years, have mainly blocked any types of reforms that they were trying to do with the Pemex and the Telex monopolies there in Mexico. Try to loose some of the labor laws and things like that, but the PRI blocked them at every turn. Calderon got nothing done in that area, but actually now they're talking that the PRI, if they initiate these types of reforms, the PAN will go along with them. So you could actually get some opening up of the economy there, which tends to bring a lot of it slows the immigration down, it slows the coyote trafficking across the border. So what you could have from that is the fact that the other thing I need to mention is if you split Mexico in half horizontally, they've calculated, they've tracked the voting tendencies of the entire North, where we've done all these maquiladora projects from 20, 30 years ago, to a lot of the American businessmen that are going across the border and getting cheaper labor and then shipping through Mexican trucking back into the United States. But the entire North votes typically for the PAN or for the reformist parties at the time, whereas the entire southern area where they have far less contact with this commerce votes far left and with the radicals and with the Chavez backers, and you've got the Zapatista rebellion still in the Yucatan Peninsula down there. But I'm going to give you an optimistic point of view that if that happens, you will see a lot more calming. I think you may even get the PRI could actually go after the cartels continually, but the downside of that is pre-governors, kind of potentates throughout the rest of the country that have been there forever are looking to recapture the glory days of when they had the graft and when they had the when they ran the place like a mafioso. So that's the downside of that. So let me cut it there and take questions.
Well, thank you so much. That was a terrific presentation, grim and as scary as the one that Claire did. Do we have some questions for Jon? I certainly have one, which is, given the current administration, what have they done, if anything, to deal with the current situation with the PRE, but also with the border risks?
Thank you. I was actually at an off-the-record meeting with the political appointee to the Department of Homeland Security, so I'm not sure how much of this I can be specific about. But my question was, how many of the political parties have you talked to, and what have they said to you about whether they will continue the fight against the drug cartels or not? And he said instantly, yes. 3 out of the 4 said yes. So he wouldn't elaborate on who the 4th was. I think I know, but it looks like the PRE will win, and I think the PRE will continue. The only thing, you've had these, AMLO has come out with saying he wants abrazos, no balazos, or hugs, not bullets, is what that, so you get this tendency lately that everybody wants to cut down on violence rather than go after the cartels. And what that kind of translates into, and this has been from all the other 3 parties, is more focus on stopping, or they'll be more discreet with the cartels if the cartels will agree to be more discreet with their violence. So that's a little bit more cautious perspective.
And do we have other questions here? Yes, in the right.
The PRE has a history, if I remember correctly from my youth when they were in power, of being kind of anti-American institutionally as well. Do you have a prediction to make there about will they be more likely to join in America bashing?
Between the PAN, very pro-American. The PRE, not nearly as anti-American as they were before. They've moderated their rhetoric on that a lot. They've had, AMLO has kind of picked it up where they've left off, though. So a lot of the importance of Sunday's election depends on whether AMLO comes in second or Josefina Mota comes in second, who's far more pro-American, and that will affect a lot of the reform that happens. But the PRE has they've had to reform themselves to even get back close to getting back into power. So they've had to moderate their anti-Americanism. So it's going to be more so than if the PAN got elected, but not nearly as bad as it's not going to be Chavista or we're not going to hear the same things we get out of Caracas that we are from Mexico City.
And other questions? Yes, over in the right there. Do you have a microphone there? Good.
Cliff Kincaid. There's a book out by a former CIA officer on Latin America, Fidel Castro's Secrets, by Brian Littell, yeah. And he speculates in there, and this may seem obvious, but that Chavez is an actual DGI agent and was recruited by the Castro regime after he staged that unsuccessful coup and then went to Cuba on several occasions. What do you think about that theory?
He also went to Colombia and was called Comandante Centeno, I think was his Farc name. It was actually M19, I think, or both. But he also went to Colombia for a while and got guerrilla training, and he also got paid about $300,000 by the Colombian terrorists while he was in jail, and paid them back when he got in office by giving them a loan or giving them government largesse. But he went to Fidel Castro as his mentor, and I don't know if you need to call him a DGI. I doubt he was sworn in. They didn't need to. He's been their #1. He saved them after Fidel Castro lost the Soviet subsidies. This is what has saved the Castro regime, is Hugo Chavez oil largesse. He sends them weekly shipments of oil that they then trade in the spot market for hard currency, and that's the only thing that's been able to keep them in power as long as they have. So I've never read anything that I wanted to go to Brian Littell's presentation at Heritage when he was here, but had an event to go to. But I've never read that he's been officially in the DGI, but he doesn't need to. He's got between 40 and 60,000 Cubans in major positions of power. They're running his Intex, which is the identification and naturalization service, so they handle all the giving away visas, and they've already been caught giving it to Hezbollah operatives and sending people to Iran to train. So yeah, whether you call him a DJI operative or not, it's interchangeable. The last chapter in my book is about EMPs. This is another thing that gets scoffed at here if you mention this. But Roscoe Bartlett, who's a brilliant, if you don't know his background, read his CV. He's got about 3 degrees in astrophysics or something like that. But he tells a story about being in a hotel in Paris or somewhere, and there are 3 Russians there that they're going to talk on the Kosovo peace accord or something like that, and they mentioned to him, if you guys have spit on us, so if we wanted to really attack you guys, we would drop an EMP over the center of the Midwestern United States and knock you out. Half of you be dead in 6 months. And the more I've delved into this, the more I've dug into this, it is by far the most potent weapon that they could do about it, because it knocks out all transportation, all electronics, all medicine, all access to food, medicine, everything you need to live. So it's a very potent weapon, and I think the most understudied and undervalued and underappreciated by the establishment here. And one of the things that we keep hearing, these rumors about missiles in the Paraguay Peninsula in Venezuela that Iran is setting up. Have no confirmation of that yet, so I try not to mention it, but the speculation is whether they would have a deliverable missile that could hit the United States. And to me, they don't need one. They can buy a Shahab 3 on the open market, or maybe a Scud, I think maybe is a better selection. Put it on a trawler into the Gulf of Mexico, launch it from there where you're not going to have any lead time for any kind of Patriot-type missile to shoot it down. Pop it over the top of where we have an electrical hub in Kansas or in the Midwest. You'll knock out half the electricity in the United States, and that's all they need to do.